Hello. I say good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where in the world you are coming in from. So, dissertation committee member, Dr. Tessa Muncy, is joining us from the United Kingdom, where it is evening. So, welcome, excuse me, everyone, to this capstone event. Lorinda Fontaine Farris will be defending her dissertation entitled Women's Intuition, Faith, and Ancestry, Taproots in the Garden of a Woman's Health, in which she asks the key question, how do intuition, faith, and ancestry affect women's health? My name is Annette Williams, and I am the chair of Lorinda's dissertation committee. So for now, I'll take you through the dissertation flow so you'll know what to expect. First, I will introduce the committee members. I'll read our bios so you know something about our backgrounds and our connection to the material. I will introduce Lorinda. She will present for about 45 minutes, and the committee will ask 2 rounds of questions of Lorinda, after which the audience will have an opportunity to ask questions of Lorinda. And while that's happening, the committee will step away for deliberation. And then during that time, the Lorinda and audience members can continue talking, asking questions, having a conversation about the dissertation. And then the committee will return with our recommendations. So with that, I'd like to begin the introductions with Dr. Tessa Muncy. Tessa progressed steadily up the academic ladder from a BA in psychology to an MA in women's studies to satisfy a feminist itch in the 1990s, culminating in a PhD examining the psychological characteristics of student nurses. Tessa's occupational life as a nurse consisted of many happy years as a community nurse, a spell as a health visitor, just long enough to know she didn't want to be one, but which propelled her into higher education, first as a student and subsequently as a nurse educator. Becoming Associate Dean for Research and Postgraduate Education at Homerton College, Cambridge, setting up and directing a multidisciplinary master's degree at the University of Cambridge, writing an undergraduate nursing curriculum, and setting up an international mixed methods conference for her career highlights before retirement in 2008. Having found that retirement consisted of working for very little remuneration, Tessa was tempted back into work as a senior lecturer in the School of Healthcare, University of Leeds. In a second attempt at retirement, she delights in acting as a consultant for researchers wanting to use creative methods in their studies. She participates in and writes about the development of both creative and mixed methods. Growing up in a multicultural environment, studying disciplines with diverse perspectives, and the privilege of meeting many individuals in their homes, Tessa has never lost her interest in the splendid diversity that accompanies working with people. So welcome, Dr. Muncy, and thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry it was so long now.
Dr. Anna Corwin is a second internal member, as you call, of Lorinda's dissertation committee. So Dr. Anna I. Corwin received her PhD from UCLA and is a recipient of fellowships from the National Science Foundation and the National Endowment for the Humanities for her research on aging and well-being. Dr. Corwin has spent the last 16 years researching how everyday practices shape individuals' experiences of well-being as we age. Her newest project, funded by the Templeton World Charity Foundation, explores religious intelligences around the world. An author of many peer-reviewed articles and the book, Embracing Age, How Catholic Nuns Became Models of Well-Being, published in 2021 with Rutgers University Press, Dr. Corwin's work explores the effects of everyday routines and habits on health and well-being in older age. Thank you, Dr. Corwin. So as for me, I am Associate Professor and Co-Chair with Dr. Corwin of the Women's Spirituality PhD program and the Women, Gender, Spirituality, and Social Justice MA program at CIIS. My master's degree is in Jungian and archetypal psychology, and my doctorate is in philosophy and religion with specialization in women's spirituality. Research interests have centered on soul healing from sexual trauma and on the theme of women's spiritual power and agency within the Yoruba Ifa tradition. Among others, I have authored The Divine Feminine in Yoruba Cosmology, found in Goddesses in Myth, History, and Culture, Wisdom of the Primordial Feminine, Wisdom of Women, Odu Ifa, and Yoruba Religious Tradition, in Philosophia, Wisdom Goddess Traditions, and Deconstruction and Reclamation, A Healing Journey, in Spiritual Healing from Sexual Violence and an Intersectional Guide. So now you have an introduction to the committee members and how we intersect with Lorinda's wonderful work. And so now I'll turn it over to Lorinda to present on her dissertation, Women's Intuition, Faith, and Ancestry, Taproots in the Garden of a Woman's Health. Lorinda.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. It is a delight, needless to say, to be here. I appreciate all of you who are here. I am here, obviously, to present this dissertation, Women's Intuition, Faith, and Ancestry, and how I believe they are the taproots in the garden of a woman's health. Let me pull up my slides. Is everyone able to see this okay?
We're seeing good.
Yeah, looks good.
The view from a small island is probably actually, hang on. Okay. I have been a women's healthcare nurse practitioner for over 20 years, having practiced primarily in both the military and the U.S. governmental healthcare systems. It is those years of clinical practice that led me to the Women's Spirituality program. I had seen time and again in my work, especially with women struggling with chronic gynecological issues, that there was likely much more beneath their body's physical cries for care. I wanted deeply to better understand how spirituality, that which lay beneath the physical, affected a woman's health. In my clinical practice, I had long suspected that there were critical aspects of a woman's spirituality that likely indeed affected her physical health. I ultimately began asking myself, how does women's intuition, faith, and ancestry affect her health? The view from a small island is a perfect subtitle for this work. After 7 years of living and writing on an island, the experience has beautifully colored my life in hues I am not certain I had ever seen. This is a quote I used in my dissertation, and I feel that it is profoundly apt to begin to tell the tale of this autoethnography. It is a quote from Alain Sixous, a French writer and playwright who I feel succinctly states what I have come to know to be true. Write yourself. Your body must be heard. Only then will the immense resources of the unconscious spring forth. It was throughout my women's spirituality coursework that women's intuition and faith came to the forefront of my curiosities. In the fall of 2018, I took a course called Curanderismo, Ancestral Spiritual Healing Traditions, taught by Brenda Salgado. This course helped me see that faith and ancestry were intertwined not only in my own culture, but in many cultures around the world. I wrote the final paper for that course, exploring the ancestral healing traditions of my Franco-American heritage and family. Both sides of my father's family had been French. My father's side was originally from an island off the southwest coast of southern France, an island called Ile Dieu, meaning the island of God. I have to tell you, I found this to be amazingly serendipitous, as at the start of my PhD journey, literally the first semester, I moved back home to Maine to live in our home and on an island. It was my first time I had lived in this home and lived on an island. Not to mention to be studying spirituality and learn that your ancestors came from the island of God felt pretty magical. My father's mother's family, the Jakes family, had come from southeastern Canada. My father did not speak English until he was nearly 8 years old. And at that time in Maine, he was not allowed to attend school until he could speak English. And once he was in school, he was not allowed to speak his native French. My father explained to me that he didn't like school from the very beginning because of all the barriers he experienced to learning as a result of those laws. Doing the paper on my father's French family history and healing traditions, as well as having had the opportunity to speak with him about his experiences growing up, as well as for those of his parents and grandparents, profoundly helped me build upon my ponderings of how this triad of inner knowing, intuition, faith, and ancestry might affect our health. In the literature review, I explored women's intuition through 4 major areas, including healing, women's knowing, ecofeminism, and creativity. These areas brought a significant breadth and depth of resources and literature to the table, ranging from woman as healer and herbal healing throughout history to the profound ways in which creativity feeds a woman's intuition and how a woman's intuition feeds her creativity. Further in the literature review, I explored an array of faith sources, both within and outside the realm of religious context, to ensure the inclusion of the myriad aspects of faith. Lastly, I peered into Ancestry's relation to health. But in this particular area, more so than any other area, it was only as I dug deeper into the research after gathering my data that I then discovered a vast array of work related to this topic. The methodologies chosen for my work posted firm pillars for the framework of this research. Feminist theory, autoethnography, and critical theory were a firm tripod that boldly held this work together throughout the dissertation. Feminist theory, without a doubt, was a necessary foundation. In fact, I wrote in my dissertation, "This is a spiritual feminist project because it must be." Long before the patriarchal orientation inherent in modern-day medicine, healing came from women. Their feminine energy was rooted in the wisdom of Mother Earth's bounty, an inner knowing, and healing ways passed from previous generations of women. Feminist theory, with its movement beyond the patriarchy, goes hand in hand with both the methodologies of autoethnography and critical theory. Autoethnography, in particular, was a way of departing from non-binary consciousness and delving into a great deal of the unknown. It pushed me far outside my comfort zone and had me begin with myself. It allowed for a cavernous exploration of self and required creativity in a way that perhaps other methods might not have been able to provide. Critical theory found relevance in my French-Canadian ancestry with their experience of years of unwelcome and oppression in Protestant English New England. With critical theory's historical sensitivity, focus on domination and economic systems of exploitation, and an ability to assist in bridging gaps between disciplines as I was attempting to do, I found it to be a fitting methodology. I then used these methodologies to begin to design the study. As I wanted this to be very healthcare focused, I chose to use the Institute for Functional Medicine's Functional Medicine Timeline to begin that journey of writing my own health history. And this is the Functional Medicine Timeline. As you can see from the left side of the slide, you begin with literally before you were conceived, with as much information as you may have about your parents at the time that you were conceived, all the way to the right side of the slide, current day issues. Functional medicine is a term for a holistic way of practicing medicine, and the Institute for Functional Medicine is an international institute that teaches practitioners how to practice this type of medicine. I am a trained practitioner of this methodology, so I will admit bias, and in that biased opinion, I feel it is the way that all medicine should be practiced, as it is about getting to the underlying cause of a disease or symptoms and treating it, as opposed to merely treating symptoms, as is often the case in Western medicine. This functional medicine timeline requires one to look at one's health and illness, as I said, from before birth to current day. Also, and especially, taking into consideration what was happening in their lives at the time of ill health. In other words, what life events might have been occurring at the time before or after the episode of illness or diagnosis. So rather than being interviewed by a fellow practitioner, I essentially interviewed myself. I sat on the floor of my office with a lengthy piece of art roll paper and became my own patient. I sat as any patient in a functional medicine setting would, reflecting back upon my chronological health history from birth to present day, including what was happening to the best of my knowledge in my parents' lives before and including my birth. I then painstakingly annotated all medical diagnoses, issues, and symptoms, as well as notes about what events were happening in my life at that time, if any. Despite being a healthcare provider for over 20 years, there were medical issues that surfaced that I had either forgotten or not thought about for years. Just as with my regular patients, however, I reminded myself to write it all down, whether I thought it was significant or not. I grew to truly appreciate how important this last instruction is. For once something is written, it has the power to spark another thought, another memory, or perhaps a whisper. And it's oftentimes the whispers that the body encourages to come to the surface, hopefully up and out to voice fruition and onto the paper. This is precisely what happened to me. From the work of the timeline, I was then able to pinpoint 3 primary health issues underpinning the various health issues I had experienced throughout my life. I do want to add here, for those of you familiar with the abstract, originally I had identified 4 health issues, but I quickly learned in this research that I was gathering plenty of information and I would not be able to tackle all 4. So the 3 major issues were childhood sexual abuse, food issues, and body image issues. I have to tell you that when I returned to the research after gathering my AE data, my autoethnographic data. I ultimately combined the food issues and the body image issues together because so much of the existing research overlapped the two themes. As much as I did not want childhood sexual abuse to be the crux of this work, I discovered that in all things autoethnography, the work has a way of steering you as opposed to you steering it. And although I suppose this is true of all research, as I am not a seasoned researcher by any stretch of the imagination, the fact that childhood sexual abuse became the underpinning of this exploration brought both actual and metaphorical tears as I faced the reality. The autoethnographic writings clearly identified childhood sexual abuse to have been the start of innumerable physical and psychological health issues throughout my life. What I had not yet understood was the degree to which my health issues were a classic prototype for a woman having survived childhood sexual abuse. In Linda Hogan's book called The Woman Who Watches Over the World, a Native Memoir, she explains to the reader that she began the book intending to write about pain, but it ended up being a book about love. She elaborates, quote, "I sat down to write about pain and wrote instead about healing, history, and survival. The work revealed to me that there is a geography of the human spirit common to all peoples." Hogan's reference to love, healing, history, survival, and common geography of the human spirit are each keenly reminiscent of my autoethnography journey. I began this work wanting to explore intuition, faith, and ancestry's involvement in a woman's health. In the process, I discovered a love for myself and my family through history and survival stories. As well, through research and writing, I came to understand and appreciate what such healing looks like, and indeed the common geography of women. What I also found interesting was that health issues I had long considered nagging nuisances, such as acne, occasional bouts of hives, and my incessant obsession with dieting, I eventually discovered those things were in the research. They connected those geographies Linda Hogan references, the geography of the human spirit. I both learned and felt that these connections were substantive. Women's sexual abuse survivors share many similarities in their stories, and although it's not a connection anyone desires, it felt validating to confirm the connection exists. I then embarked upon 9 months of writing. Although I thought I might need a year for this aspect of the work, I ironically discovered that I completed the autoethnographic writings throughout the typical length of a pregnancy, exactly 9 months. These writings were each called a vignette. I wanted to honor my French heritage. I also used French titles with English translations for the vignettes to describe the experiences of which I was writing. As ethnographers do in their work, I kept both a written and photographic journal throughout my dissertation writing. I titled it Sea Medicine, as living on a small island in Maine profoundly informed my writing and experience in ways I am certain it would not have otherwise. It forever provided an invitation to write and go within. So after 9 months of gestation and the subsequent birthing of my work, I then returned to the research to see what it had to say about the findings from my autoethnographic data, the vignettes. Peeling back the layers of the research continuously astounded me. At times I felt as if an archaeologist unearthing my own tomb. Woman's story after woman's story became mirrors in which I saw myself. They were me and I them. Harsh revelatory statistics aptly illustrated our bodies, minds, and spirits when it came to women survivors of childhood sexual abuse. Many findings validated years of challenge and questioning, both of my own experience and the experiences of my patients, both daunting and empowering at the same time, as my autoethnographic data weaved itself into the experiences of others while theirs weaved into mine. I often wondered to myself, if I felt this way as a career women's healthcare nurse practitioner, having had years of personal counseling, what would this experience have been like had I not had previous knowledge and assistance? So to have a sense of what the autoethnographic data from the vignettes revealed, I am going to read for you the first of the 15 vignettes. To provide a bit of context for this vignette, I am at a weekend Army National Guard training exercise in northern Maine, a very remote part of the state, where at the time the primary work for most people was a large local paper mill. In the vignette, I am staying in the women's bunk room in an old military armory building. And the vignette is called Première Vignette, la lettre, the letter. Sitting atop a mattress that has slept many a soldier before me, I feel ironically supported by its rickety metal frame. I pull out the stack of mail that I had shoved into my bag at the last minute while packing for this training weekend. Although these Army National Guard training weekends are usually more than busy, there is nearly always a little time in the evenings to capture for myself. As an introvert pushed into an extrovert's haven of weekend sociability, an excuse to steal away is the equivalent of giving myself an oxygen mask. And so spreading this bag of mail provides a muffled reprieve from the cacophony of soldier banter while adding a sense of civility to this raunchy mattress. My heart sinks as I know what appears to be a real letter, not a bill or junk mail. Although such a letter would normally be a morale boost, this is from someone who I have been avoiding for some time. Aware of deep-seated distress when in his presence, avoidance has been a ready-made, albeit short-term, solution. Admittedly, I haven't been entirely successful to date amid a plethora of social functions that we have both been invited to. Yet my goal need not be thwarted by something as banal as correspondence. I groan at the thought of opening the letter, and at the same time doubly groan at the possibility of not opening it. What the hell, I decide, and tear into the ordinary white letter-sized envelope, taking special care to ensure I sever his hen-scratched name in the left-hand corner. This feels satisfyingly retaliatory as I find myself conjuring great effort to quell the fear pulsating at a decibel I can nearly palpate in my eardrums. My letter-opening defiance also feels like an imaginary high five as the act reveals my inner rebel, protecting me in her small way. A fellow female officer appears in the women's bunk room as I begin to read the apology letter. I can feel the blood being shunted downward, carrying with it a salty tsunami that rolls out of the windows of my soul and onto the mattress. She witnesses the vulnerable, visceral response I have to this flood of memories. As at once I am confronted with the repressed, detested images I am trying desperately to swallow the shame while acknowledging the lump in my throat that won't let anything go down nor come up. Historically, my usual terse self would be overwhelmingly self-conscious of such uncontrolled emotions and racked appearance. However, I am far removed from anything usual at this moment. My friend and fellow officer, an angel, listens to me begin to speak out loud about the childhood abuse my body had angrily retained, and my mind had consistently worked burying the memories. My comrade is my angel. I am ethereally aware of the blessing she is at that moment. I can see and feel his conniving manipulation in tandem with inappropriate advances, fondling, and other forced physicality. Body parts are enlarged as if on a theater-sized screen in a horror movie. The male sex organ is wretched. At 6 years of age, I have not seen it before, yet the choice is not given. Unrelenting shame, it is unbearable. It and its comrade humiliation seep from every pore. The malodorous mattress is a life raft now, one I can't imagine departing, much less stepping out of the women's bunk room to face others. But I must. I'm an officer. I am in charge of troops. I'm responsible for their welfare. I feel the rockets of images landing on every part of my body as though for all to see. None of this matters, though. My welfare is not the priority. This isn't the first time I hide in a role, don an emotional flak vest, and justify avoidance of my life. Thank you for hearing the first vignette. So I then took the autoethnographic data from the 15 vignettes and returned to the research to further examine the findings. I sifted each topic, childhood sexual abuse and food and body image issues, through the research, examining first the topic itself and then women's intuition, faith, and ancestry as they related to childhood sexual abuse or food and body image issues. Therefore, each section first discussed the topic at hand and women's health in general as it related to the research findings, and then the same was done for women's intuition, faith, and ancestry. Yes, it was a lot of work and a lot of material. Each section used a vignette or two, then looked at what the vignette had to say about the topic, and then I looked at what current research had to say about what was revealed in that vignette. Finally, each section contained a relevant literary selection. I then repeated this same pattern for intuition, faith, and ancestry, as well as the same pattern in the food and body image issues themes. So let's go back to previous. I want to give you an idea of the structure of how I sifted the autoethnographic data through the current research and literature before going over the specific findings of my research. I would like to reiterate that my intention of this work from the beginning was for this work to be utilized in medicine, women's healthcare, and other disciplines that focus on the health of women, including sociology, psychology, and the like. Therefore, using this first theme of childhood sexual abuse, the vignette clearly identified childhood sexual abuse having occurred in my younger years. It speaks to the trauma of the memory of such experiences to include overwhelm and fear. It highlights the need to find a way to heal the deep wounds of this particular form of intimate trauma. The research unequivocally reveals there are lifelong health effects for a woman who has been the victim of childhood sexual abuse. It is part of a larger issue, that of violence against women. Repeatedly, the research showed that the greater the severity of sexually abusive behaviors, the greater the severity and frequency of symptomatology of health problems throughout a woman's life. And the younger the abuse began, the greater its long-term and magnitude of effects. Memory loss, also noted in the vignette, is a common experience for many sexual abuse victims. Again, just giving you a summary of how I dragged all of this through the research. This section also looked at the worldwide issue that childhood sexual abuse has been and continues to be. It also discussed the sexualization of young women in the media, the economic impact of such abuse, and the long-term health issues such as post-traumatic stress disorder and autoimmune diseases. The literary selection for this portion of the work was I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. During the second iteration of living with her mother in St. Louis at the tender age of 7, Maya was raped by her stepfather. She then endured a hospital stay, a court proceeding, and eventually a feeling of being responsible for her stepfather's death, presumably at the hands of her enraged uncles defending her honor. Making a connection between telling the truth and the ensuing death of her stepfather, Maya spent years not speaking, except to her brother Bailey. It would be some years before Maya found her voice again. I felt her book was a powerfully poignant start to the use of literary work in this dissertation, particularly as it focused on a woman's voice. So that is how each section was undertaken. In looking at the other sections, there are some items worth noting. The section about intuition looked at the history of false memory syndrome, for instance, realizing in the end that memory is a concept whereby facts are difficult to discern as many facets formulate a person's memory. Examining childhood sexual abuse and faith, especially having grown up in the Catholic Church, I reviewed research on the Catholic priests' and nuns' sexual abuse of young men and women, focusing primarily on the abuse of young women. This lent itself to looking at how this affected women's faith as well. There was also research revealing the sexual abuse of nuns, particularly very young nuns, by priests. My work also examines spirituality aside from faith, including identifying with a higher power, prayer, feeling loved, and other issues associated with spirituality as well as religious life. Lastly, in this section of childhood sexual abuse was the topic of ancestry. I was able to locate some research revealing information about my main Franco-American heritage. For instance, family and religion were central to the lives of Franco-Americans. The family handed down its essentially conservative traditional values through the generations, aided by the powerful impact of the Catholic Church's code of behavior, a strict code particularly about sexual matters. Franco-Americans often moved to places like New England, where other family members were located, cities and towns where mill workers were needed, and they assisted in filling that need. It was during this time that the Ku Klux Klan began to target the Catholic French-speaking Franco-Americans, for their French dialect was not revered as was the Parisian French, and their religion was vehemently opposed. Thus, this reality, alongside the inferior work roles they often possessed, for few Franco-Americans were in positions of authority, as well as the constricting rules of the church, resulted in the fact that anger and resentment were, and still are, often intense in this community. Lastly, most Franco-Americans had little opportunity for education. Therefore, with a lack of education and worldly ambition, this led them at an early age into the same mills Their parents had toiled before them. They were content to work for little return, trusting an eventual contentment awaiting them in heaven. This was indeed my family's history, as my father and great-grandfather both spent their lives in the paper mills. I will not go through each of the other sections other than just a few more interesting tidbits. In the food and body image issues theme, current research revealed there is an overwhelming connection to childhood sexual abuse, most especially for women. Within women's intuition, there is much healing found for childhood sexual abuse survivors in art therapy, especially in the art of mask making. Within Ancestry and food and body image issues, I discovered the healing modalities of ancestral healing to include ritual, dream work, connecting with one's living and deceased ancestors, myriad spiritual practices, energy work, hypnosis, learning about the land where one came from and lived, and various group work. A final form of ancestral healing I found fascinating was that of belly dancing, especially for women survivors of childhood sexual abuse. So looking at the discoveries in my data that overlapped with what already existed in the research looks like this. And I probably should back up and say, looking at all of the themes that I was able to glean from my autoethnographic data, in addition to what was already in the research, that's what I'm going to cover right now. So poverty. Lower socioeconomic status indeed increases the likelihood of a young woman in particular becoming a victim of CSA. Additionally, gender is similar to poverty in that across all races, ethnicities, and cultures, girls are abused at higher rates than boys. Intuition is found to be a powerful way of accessing inner knowing. Introversion is a commonality among CSA survivors. There was an interesting dissertation study done by Carol Albers at the University of Nevada at Reno that looked specifically at both the victims of childhood sexual abuse and victims of other forms of childhood trauma. Albers found significantly more intuitive and introverted intuitive people than would be expected. In fact, there were 3 times as many introverted types. Shame and self-blame were collectively found to be predictors for difficulty in victims' intimate relationships later in life. A desire to hide. This was a very common theme in my vignettes. A research team developed a body image avoidance questionnaire, considering avoidance behaviors to be actions such as social events avoided for fear that the body will be scrutinized, women wearing baggy clothes, avoiding physical intimacy, and eating less in public. Anxiety was found to be one of the consequences of the strategies for survival and coping. It was also found in the research to reveal a strong, independent, statistically significant relationship between childhood sexual abuse and the majority of mood, anxiety, and substance disorders. Lack of awareness. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. A quote in his book says, "The lack of self-awareness in victims of chronic childhood trauma is sometimes so profound that they cannot recognize themselves in a mirror. Brain scans show that this is not the result of mere inattention. The structures in charge of self-recognition may be knocked out, along with the structures related to self-experience." As previously mentioned, autoimmune disorders is a very common finding. Autoimmune disorders, particularly chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, and there are others, but those were the three most common. Obesity, weight, and eating disorders are all extremely common in this group. Interestingly, prayer and a sense of spirituality was found to be helpful for many. Fear and anger, very common. Separation from intuition. This is another area where there is a fair amount of work that has been done, particularly in the world of art and creativity. A quote by Paula Reeves in her book titled Women's Intuition, Unlocking the Wisdom of the Body, summarizes well the process of women's intuition being quelled throughout a woman's life, rather it be from childhood sexual abuse or other life wounds. She states, when we neglect what matters most to us, that then becomes the matter with us. Another common finding is a desire for control, a desire to numb. Addictions are very common. Pain, extreme body discomfort, a strong sense of vulnerability, more for girls than boys, worry, fatigue, and lastly, hope. Hope is an area, again, found in the underpinnings of feminist research. In the work of feminist author and professor Carolyn Heilbrunn, in her book, Writing a Woman's Life, she states that writing is a feminist undertaking when a woman writes of her true self, rather than the self that society would like her to be. She elaborates, women must turn to one another for stories. They must share the stories of their lives and their hopes and their unacceptable fantasies. We must stop reinscribing male words. So now that we've noted the similarities between what was revealed in my vignettes and what was already known in the research, I propose the question, which is why we're all here. What did we not know about the topic? What might I have contributed to the scholarship of this topic? I can tell you that in terms of healthcare issues, emotions, and feelings in my autoethnographic data, there was nothing in and of itself new. However, there are aspects of my work that are novel and certainly do contribute to the scholarship of on this topic. First and foremost, and forgive me, every time I read this, I think, oh, this sounds so arrogant, but there are few healthcare providers who have written autoethnographic accounts. And I honestly, in all the conversations I've had with Dr. Muncie, I've never asked her this question. But here in the U.S., we define healthcare providers as people who can prescribe, prescriptions and can order lab results and radiology and things like that. There are a lot of social worker accounts, a lot of nurse accounts, but actual healthcare providers, there's not a lot of autoethnographic accounts out there. So I feel like my findings were telling in this aspect. As I said in my dissertation, this autoethnographic work contains many contributions. The first and most significant, in my opinion, is its contribution to and for women, all women, as well as all non-binary people's healthcare. To have a female healthcare provider's written account of her personal and physical experience of childhood sexual abuse and its lifelong effects is crucial for other women. I would like to add that my autoethnography is that of a 58-year-old. Thus, it is associated with some years of life experiences. The detailed way in which the autoethnographic data are explored through social, medical, and literary research greatly informs myriad disciplines, including medicine, sociology, and psychology, as well as various populations, about the long-term sequelae of childhood sexual abuse. This work is also important for the research world of autoethnography. It is a combination of somewhat evocatively written autoethnographic data superimposed not only upon the disciplines of social science and literature, but on the medical disciplines as well. This is a critical component of this work. As a seasoned healthcare provider, I wanted this research to be utilized in all aspects of women's health and healthcare, and I feel the rigor utilized in this dissertation allows for this to be the case. It is because of this rigor that this work provides worthy credence to the bank of autoethnographic research. The next reason this work is important is for the value found in its vulnerability. This vulnerability comes from a woman veteran who is a retired military officer and a healthcare professional. Despite the multiple ways in which the mere idea of doing this work scared me, I felt the fear and did it anyway. I could have chosen to study other women, to conduct perhaps a more socially acceptable study, and kept my work about others. However, I accepted the challenge of studying myself. I was fearful of what demons lay within, and I ignored them. I soothed the inner unrest and focused on the next step. Step by step, I scaled mountains of emotions and weathered the depths of the valleys, and there were more than a few. I am certain that no dissertation is easy, and this was no different. Yet the personal, painful journey of this dissertation was mine and mine alone. This work assisted in a freedom of spirit and soul I could never have anticipated. Lastly, and significantly, my work overwhelmingly concluded that childhood sexual abuse can negatively impact an individual's health outcomes for an entire lifetime. Yet it also revealed many healing modalities that can ameliorate these negative outcomes, offering healing. It is healing these lifetime wounds that is the ultimate goal in this and all CSA work. I am satisfied that my work will offer some healing to other CSA survivors and provide a greater understanding of the complexities of CSA to those who both love and care for survivors. Perhaps it goes without saying, but I desire to thank people without whose help I would not have completed this work. My gratitude is far greater than I can begin to convey with mere words. Dr. Williams, Dr. Corwin, Dr. Muncy, Dr. Keller, B. Krosnick, Leslie Peters, the Center for Writing and Scholarship, Dr. Pittman, and of course, all the wonderful, brilliant professors here at CIIS. I am also appreciative of all the other women whose stories I featured in my work. It is in their courage to speak their truth that I found my own. I opened my dissertation with a quote by American poet Muriel Rukeyser, and when I would like to take a moment to reflect upon it. Telling the truth of my life indeed split my world open. I have come to believe that as more women tell their stories and split their worlds open, we will undoubtedly split many a paradigm wide open and change the world in which we live. It all begins with planting a seed, and I believe my work has been a seed. Finally, thank you to all of you here for your time and attention. I invite comments and questions at this time, and I'm already thinking of the zillion other things I want to say.
Thank you, Lorinda. That was absolutely beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Stop sharing. Oh, yeah. Take the moment to sort of sink in it, all the love and appreciation that's being sent your way. Take a moment. Okay, Dr. Kimberly, stop. You make me start crying. Oh, it was lovely. Yeah, the work was just the vignettes were so poignantly written, and then you speak to the vulnerability of your process, and that was so evident in the dissertation itself, in the words, in the way things were structured, and even in the literature that you chose to then as examples to your process, your personal story, the story in the data from the literature, and then tying it together with the literature to sort of show for me how these stories are in the culture. These realities are in the culture, are part of the culture, are reflected in the literature and in other ways within the culture. That was a lovely package. Yeah.
Thank you.
So what I'd like to do is we now have 2 rounds of questions from the committee and comments, and I would like to begin with Dr. Muncy.
Oh dear. I've had time to recover, I hope. Lorinda, well done. Stunning. Thank you for the privilege of being allowed to be part of your journey. Thank you for letting me be here. I feel a bit of a fraud, but I have been very much part of your journey, and it has been a privilege. I remember reading the letter for the first time and thinking, with that inner knowing that you've talked about so beautifully, I knew where this was going. And yes, the letter was an important starting point, but for me, I will remember and reflect on the little girl, the fat little girl in the polyester flowered dress. You perhaps remember her on the school stage, and what a journey you've been on, and how far you've come since that little girl. So I don't know why I'm feeling emotional, but I just feel so privileged to be part of this, and I know you will be feeling emotional too. I'm going to try and behave now because Annette will know that I came up with all these questions because I'm just fascinated by the whole thing. But she quite rightly pointed out late last night, Tessa, you can't possibly bombard Lorinda with that, array of questions. So I'm going to stick to my brief, which was to think about autoethnography as a method. That's what I have been involved in, although I've been very much part of your journey. And you steered me in very well to my first question, really, which was recognizing that healthcare providers themselves do not do autoethnography. They don't value it. They're skeptical about it. And if you remember right back at the beginning, the reason I got into autoethnography in the first place was because I was going to conferences and I was listening to so-called experts talk about teenage pregnancy and realized they weren't telling my story. And I thought, I've got a voice in the academy. I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to find a way of providing a story. And I think that's what you have done as a healthcare provider, someone who was in that position. You have done that. So I think, I mean, you've encountered skepticism during this course about autoethnography. You've certainly encountered skepticism in your working life because what healthcare providers value is the golden research method, which is RCTs. They want to take people out of the study. People are complicated. People are, get in the way. They're messy. And so you remove people from it and you get to the nitty gritty. And of course, for me, that removes life. It removes reality, everybody's reality. So my first question, quite simply, would be, you've encountered that skepticism. How would you address it now? How would you respond to a skeptic who says that autoethnography is just self-indulgence?
I would immediately challenge them to do it on themselves. Even if they were just to sit down for a few hours and do the functional medicine timeline in its entirety, and most importantly, to look at what was happening socially in their lives at the time of those medical issues. I would challenge the person to attempt to do a mini autoethnography simply with the timeline, because it changes it. I remember thinking, and literally, probably can't see it, but that big roll of art paper, it's still up there with all my little flags, and it.
I remember it well.
It's extremely involved, and here I am taking care of women for all these years and knowing my own history, but had never put it on a piece of paper and looked at how is all of this connected, and when did these things happen? And it just starts to fit, and you say, oh my goodness, until you do that, you cannot scoff at autoethnography, because it is, well, of course, Dr. Muncie knows that, I am a convert. I think it's a beautiful methodology that, and then of course, because it changes the researcher, whenever that researcher goes out to talk about that work, it's going to change others. Just talking about it will change others. So thank you for asking that question.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Vinci. I'll turn it over to Dr. Corwin.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much, Lorinda. And I'm honored to be part of this. I came on a little bit later in the stage because I joined CIIS later, and you were incredibly graceful with moving with that change and having me come onto your committee. And it's been just such a joy to work with you. So thank you. And thank you for this presentation today. It was really lovely. I have a couple of comments. One, Tessa, is almost starting with you. I am an anthropologist, and so I just love your comment about how this is sort of the fight of I don't know, all of my research. It's look at these people, we are complicated. And if you look at the actual, people, the data that people produce, meaning our lives and our behavior and reality, and exactly what Lorinda is talking about here, it is messy. It's messy and it's complicated. And we have this way because of the cis heteropatriarchy and the sort of way that science has moved, the history of the Enlightenment, we have this way of wishing and hoping that our data would be clean and perfect and tidy. And just as you said, Tessa, we remove people in order to pretend that we're working with something that's not as complicated as humans. But when you're studying humans have to be the data if you want to understand humans. And so, Lorinda, what you did here, it's beautiful. And if people talk about, you're right, we have that sort of ambient criticism of autoethnography as self-indulgent, and these are also, sexist critiques too. It's when a woman looks at herself, it's imagined to be self-indulgent, whereas when philosophers, many of the most famous philosophers we think of, any of them, when they sit alone in a room and think about themselves and write about it, nobody ever calls Spinoza or Hobbes or anyone else self-indulgent. I mean, maybe we I don't think that critique is out there in the same way it is for women doing this kind of work. So it's profound and it's brave and it's important and it's science. So yeah, thank you for that comment, and thank you, Lorinda, for doing this marvelous work. One of the things that I was thinking about just today when you were talking about functional medicine and the timeline and the kind of refusal that physicians and clinicians have for taking context into account when they're looking at medical outcomes. I was thinking about Freud, who obviously has a tremendously mixed and a major impact on how we think about a lot of things nowadays, and a very mixed, how should I put it, legacy. And a lot of Freud's early work was looking at women who people thought were hysterical. And he did this work with women, and he found out that actually they were being abused. They had histories of childhood sexual abuse, or they were enduring abuse. And so his first work actually revealed this. And it showed that that was the root cause of a lot of this distress that these female patients he had were enduring. And then when he tried to write about that, his peers turned against him. And so then he kind of said, forget it. And the rest of the legacy of his work was like, look, women are hysterical. Let's blame the moms. And it's, we can blame Freud. Absolutely. He made a huge mistake there when he didn't listen, when he listened to his peers and fell to the cave to that pressure. And I think there's a way of looking at that story that looks at the way patriarchy and these structural factors can impact even someone like Freud, who had all this power and was doing something new. And so I'm thinking about your work, Lorinda, and what you're doing, and you're up against this, in some way, I don't know, this is maybe a grandiose thing to say, but, or a silly thing to say, but I think it's quite true. You're doing this, almost the same thing that early Freud tried to do, which is say, look at this. We have all of these women who are experiencing distress, and this distress is coming in a lot of different ways. And you have this incredible list, and you outline this in your dissertation, and it's everything from, you talk about, minor things like acne, but also major physiological distress, autoimmune disorders, chronic pain, chronic illnesses. And all of these can be connected to these social context things, these things that women are enduring. And so the call, it's easy what the medical world wants us to do, and wanted Freud to do, and wants us to do, and wants you as a nurse practitioner to do, is to ignore all of that and just put on your little blinders and say, oh, look, this woman happens to have acne, and she happens to have IBS, and she happens to have all of these things, and let's put our blinders on and treat the things that are in front of us, that the symptoms don't scare us. Because if we just think about acne, it's not going to scare us, and we're not going to have to think about how many of our community members, how many people in our society, how many of our little girls have experienced this kind of abuse and trauma. And it was this pressure that Freud caved to. He was not strong enough to say, no, this is real, which is what he originally saw. He caved to it, and he got something out of that, which is fame and a legacy, but he destroyed a lot of people's lives by following that path. And so I see this thing that you're doing. I say this because I think this context is important and is powerful, and what you're doing is huge and can have an impact on people's lives. And it's really, really powerful. And so I, with all of, so there's some of the thoughts that I had today as I was listening to you. And what I want to ask you as a question, Lorinda, is, you spoke about this functional medicine schema, and you're talking as both someone who's experienced as someone you're talking to your own experience, life experience, but you're also speaking to us as a clinician. And I'm wondering if you would talk to this bigger question of what do we need to do at this point? What would you like to see your fellow clinicians, fellow nurse practitioners do? You know, it's sort of what should we do? How do we change this? If you were to get, and given, I think we can imagine this utopian ideal where everyone walks in, we're given a functional medicine timeline, we have a couple of hours together in our intakes, you know, we have, you know, that. But given where we are, if you're speaking to a nurse practitioner who is practicing within the system that more or less exists, or any other physician, any other clinician, what advice would you give? What would you like to see in terms of the changes in how contemporary medicine is practiced?
I love these questions because they're questions that can come from my heart, you know. Because I've thought a lot about this, because I don't think that we need another place to refer to, you know, because I think patients are often dizzied by the number of places they have to go to do something else. Because, you know, I think one of the most aggravating things in women's healthcare is, oh, we can only deal with one problem today. You know, that's all we have time for. And when you have someone who's having chronic pelvic pain, you know, I mean, let's be real. I think an excellent question for any healthcare provider to ask is to ask the woman, what do you think is going on? Where do you think this might be stemming from? Even if she has no clue, none, it's never entered her brain to think about that. You've planted the seed, and it might come up in a dream. It might come up talking to a girlfriend over coffee. I think that is just plant that seed.
Mm-hmm.
I love that question. Thank you. And I love these questions. Thank you. You're making it easier for me because I can just talk.
That's the goal, Lorinda. You have done the work. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And thank you, Anna and Tessa. And Anna, that, yeah, putting all of that context and the reality, right, that women experience when they go into the medical office. And thank you for your answer. And that was the simplicity of it is I can't think of a word for it. It's elegant. The simplicity of it is it's truly elegant. So Anna, your question sort of dovetailed a bit with mine, so I'm going to go in a different direction. So I don't know if you thought about this, but as I was reading the dissertation and especially looking at spirituality as a healing modality, and ancestors and ancestry, I got to thinking about epigenetics and what it is that we pass down, and why is it that things get passed down, and how things get passed down so that we can heal not only ourselves but also our line. So things that go back generations that we're carrying forward. Each generation carries it forward with the hope, you know, that it will get healed, or get addressed, and get looked at. I didn't know if you had any comments or thoughts about epigenetics within the context of especially childhood sexual abuse.
Of course, I have thoughts. That's another question. And it's the very first course we take in this program, or at least that I did, was Dr. Williams's course on, you know, the mother line. And my mom's memory at that time was well enough to be able to have discussions with me, which I'm forever grateful for. Because that was another piece, is just looking at the repeated patterns in it, just astounding, the repeated patterns. And I know that that's a little outside of the epigenetics per se, but for me, it's all part of that. I think that and I'm sorry, can you ask, because my brain went in a different direction. Can you ask the
Oh,
direct?
follow your intuition. Where did your brain go?
Yeah.
Thank you. I think this is a whole other area that, and I'm sure this has happened to everyone, but you get through the work and you think of all these other areas that I want to study. One of the enormous ones to me is the pelvis. I mean, this, to me, I could take this research now and just go crazy with the creativity, the pelvis, the sacral chakra. I mean, it's just, and to me, that is directly connected to epigenetics because this is where we all came from. We came from the womb in that region of the body. And there's no way that, my brother is the same way. I know there's this, he and I carry the same genetics, and there's things that came from my mom's eggs that are in him. It's a whole other research world that I would love to dive into, because I think there's a lot there that hasn't even been explored. And epigenetics was one of my little rabbit holes that I went down because it was so fascinating as it related to this study. I've learned about epigenetics through functional medicine, but once looking at it through this lens, very different lens. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question, but
That's good. Thank you.
about it.
Yes, I'll take it. Thank you, Lorinda. Dr. Muncy, for our second round of questions.
Oh, wow. I mean, Lorinda, I take my hat off to you to be so responsive to questions that come out of the blue. It's one thing to prepare, it's another to get questions out of the blue. But yeah, I almost feel sad I'm coming to the end of my academic life, because there are so many things I would still like to write about. And that repeated behaviours is one of them. The idea of, my father's mother was a single parent at the end of the First World War. Her fiance died in the First World War, so she was a single mother who raised a child outside marriage. I was a single mother who raised a child outside marriage. That you can see these patterns that emerge in our lives, and I think that I was interested in you mentioning the pelvis, because it was very clear to me. We had long conversations, didn't we, about the sacral chakra, and if you read, I can't remember the name of the author of the book that I have sitting behind me. I could turn around and find it, but I won't. She describes most of your issues, your medical issues, could be related back to the sacral chakra, if I remember rightly. So yes, I'm apart from the book I've never wrote on how to supervise the autoethnography student, and I don't rule that out, but I feel quite sad that these will have to be taken up by people like yourselves to take these things forward into the future. But I said I would behave, and I'll come back to my autoethnographic methodological question, the second one, and it's quite important in respect of everything everybody said, is that nobody's autoethnography is their own story to tell. It involves lots of other people. You've mentioned your mother, you've mentioned your father, you've mentioned your grandparents, you've mentioned your brother. These people also have a story within your story. And so what's perhaps important to explore is the ethical issues that come from doing an autoethnographic study. What are they?
Yeah, excellent question. And really struggled, I will be honest, really struggled with this in the beginning, especially with that first vignette that I read. Because it's, there's so many questions to ask yourself, well, obviously is the person still alive? And, because this will be public, and that person's identity needs to be protected. And yeah, so that it reminds me a lot of, the world of HIPAA in medicine, protecting patients' private information. It's really very similar. And so I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I know your question is about what are the ethical issues. It's really all about
What perhaps I could hone you into, what did you choose not to share?
Yeah.
Because of that issue. Because everybody makes a decision. I made one when I started to be public about my story. I made a very, very conscious decision. So people who read the book that you came across, you stumbled across, think they know me. They think they know everything about me, but they don't, because there are things that I chose to exclude. What did you choose to exclude, perhaps for those reasons?
It's so interesting because the forever healing wounded girl wanted desperately to just identify, who is this person? But I didn't, and I knew that I couldn't and I wouldn't, because it wasn't important. In the end, it wasn't important, but I had to go through my own process of letting that go. Because this was the other thing that was so fascinating, is by really immersing yourself into what was happening in my life. I was 23 years old when I received that letter. And to put yourself in that place and to really be there when you're in that writing, and you start to relive all of these things. And so it brings up the anger of all that stuff. And so I chose to leave that person's identity out because it wasn't an issue. There's another vignette where I leave out another person's identity because I think I'm just repeating the same thing, leaving out various people's identities. And then little nuances of my story that I felt in the end that, it would tell too much about me, that I felt vulnerable enough with what I put out there that there were some details that I pulled back on just about me. So, yeah. Excellent.
I think you're absolutely right. It's to protect yourself, but it's to protect others. It's an acknowledgement, if you like, of the stories that got away. I think you make but people are very worried about that. The stories that got away, as if you're, I've been called a liar in public when I've presented my work. I think that was the most blatant comment I came across. I was in a conference for midwives, and I was relating my story to try and get them to see, as I hope you will. I want you to go public with your story and get these healthcare professionals on board and realizing that there's another way to look at these things. And this woman put up a hand to ask a question, and she said, I completely disagree with everything you've said. I fundamentally disagree with everything you've said. I don't believe it happened in that way. I thought the lecture theatre as they breathed in, I thought the walls would come in with them, because it was just such a stunned silence. I hope you never encounter that, but you are absolutely right to protect yourself from skeptics, to refer back to my original question, because it does make you vulnerable. And people, I always know when I've been speaking to somebody who's been equally affected because of the types of questions they ask, and those in denial are often the ones that have been affected the most, but they don't want to address it. So it's just a word of caution as well when you start to put your word out there, as I hope you will, that people have got their own stories to protect that they don't want to hear, perhaps. But thank you. Fantastic answer.
Thank you,
Back to
Dr.
you.
Massey.
Thank you.
Anna.
Thank you. Oh, and I just, sorry, before, again, I'm responding to Dr. Muncy first, but just being called a liar at a professional conference, my heart goes out to you. So thank you for your
So
continued.
thank you.
My last question, Lorinda, for you is the functional medicine timeline that you used in your dissertation and promote as something that you see as quite useful. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to how you see it used in a clinical setting, and do you also recommend it or do you recommend it for individuals maybe like you who, I mean, I'm asking this in part because of your response to my last question, which was, I asked about, what clinicians should do. And you said, they could ask these more open questions and that might lead not just, I mean, what was surprising to me in your answer was you were saying that might lead not only to how they are behaving in the clinic, but also to how the patient might then take that question and move in their life or their lives. And so I wonder if you could speak just a little bit to the utility, to the use of the functional medicine timeline, both how do you see it used by clinicians, like how, because partly I'm thinking like this is a huge amount of data. And so how does a clinician look at that with a patient who maybe they are working with, who has, whatever they're coming in with presenting symptoms, and then this time, how does that work in the clinic? And then in addition, I guess the other question, the second part of the question is, do you see this, it seems like you used it individually as an individual for yourself. And I wonder if you see this as potentially useful, or maybe it's already used like this or recommended like this for individuals who maybe are out not working necessarily right with their physician, but maybe using it for themselves. And how do you see that working? Does that question make sense? Those two parts of the how, yeah, okay.
I think it does. I think one of the things, because again, this is something I've thought about a lot. I thought, because in my military and government role, I was not able to use the functional medicine timeline because it just is too time consuming. But one of the things I've thought about is if a healthcare provider was interested in just having the patient, with all the other forms people have to fill out, just kind of put their name on a form on the functional medicine timeline to keep it in their chart, so that when she comes in, let's say for her every 5 year or whatever pap smear, and if she has an issue, to just jot that down on the functional medicine timeline, and to also ask the question. I think the important thing is not just the diagnosis of what, or symptoms she's having, but at the same time, what's happening in your life. I mean, to me, that's like such an important, a good example right now. I mean, we just recently placed my mom in an Alzheimer's care center. That's huge, right? I mean, so it's that kind of thing when someone is having whatever health issue it is, ask what else is happening. What does your life look like right now? What's if you were to give me 3 significant things that are happening in your life right now, and just jot that down. And so you just have one little instance on that timeline. And the next time they come in, you can reference it. If you learn something new, jot that down, rather than trying to tackle the thing in all one thing, because that's just not realistic in our healthcare system, unfortunately. And then what was the other thought that I had? Oh, I think that the functional medicine timeline is anyone could use it. And it doesn't even have to be, the fancy schmancy, their form. It's just sitting down to think about, just journaling, a little art journal book where you just draw a line. What was happening to my mom and dad when I was born? Where were they living? What was their lifelike financially and otherwise. I mean, I think it's, to me, I see that as a piece of artwork. You know, it's like, this is the art of my life. And to start, I don't know what to, you know, to start putting in the different colors and have fun with it, you know. Because I think it's just and what I love about that is it's not as daunting, you know, to sit down and say, okay, I'm gonna, like I did, say, okay, I need to finish this. Of course, that was a different scenario, but to just little by little, like you go back to a coloring book, you know, and just say, okay, I'm ready to tackle the teenage years. What was that like? What was happening? You know, I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. And what a kind of glorious way to think about doing like as art, as artwork, as a tapestry. That's just beautiful. Thank you so much, Lorinda.
Thank you, Anna. So I had like two divergent streams in my head. But I'll go back to identity. Dr. Muncy, you're talking about the question of identity. I remember in my own experience, when I was old enough to sort of to speak what had happened to me, the question is, do I do that? And if I do that, what are the repercussions? And it was not, you know, this person is alive. What is this person going to say? What are their children going to say? What is my mother? You know, this was like it just became so daunting to think about the repercussions, you know, and how that would ripple out. That silenced me. So yeah, I can see that. It's like the question of who do you identify, and what happens when you do that. But my question really is, when I saw a note in the comments, how are you going to take stuff into the world for lay people? You know, not even so much the medical profession, but you know, just for people who are interested, people who might be interested, who will get value out of this, and away from the academic papers, because that's one arm, you know, journals and academic papers and presentations, and then bringing it out just for the general public. And Sandy Miranda had a wonderful comment in there when you were talking about the comic book, when you're talking about you know, making it art, like, I know, and just following up on that thread as a way of bringing it out to the public in a way that's accessible. I don't know if you ever had any thoughts about how we will bring this out further.
A couple of things. There's a professor at the University of Florida who works in the School of Medicine there, and I apologize, I don't have her name handy at the ready, and I'm not. Anyway, I don't have her name off the top of my head. Anyway, she does a lot of work with autoethnography, and I reached out to her early in my work, and just to say, you know, gosh, I'm following you because I see what you produce. And she was wonderful and has been such a wonderful resource throughout the process. And she is involved in, they have a series of work around autoethnography. And she said then, when she saw my abstract, that she would be interested in that being part of their series. And I thought for sure after all this time, because that was like 4 years ago, I thought, oh, they've forgotten about me, nothing's going to happen. But I reached out to her and they're still very interested. And we've talked about using that, being part of their book, series, that using that series as a platform to perhaps look at my work being a book on its own, which I'm very attracted to, because I would like for it to be somehow put into interest, for someone to just read it out of interest. And the other piece that I want to do personally is I cannot wait to do some artwork and see where that takes me with this work. I have had an incredible pull to, I've done very little artwork in my life because of work, just work all the time. That's all you do. And doing this process had made me say, God, I have to paint. I have to do, like, I want to do one of those mask making classes. I think that would be fascinating, and just see what little seeds that plants for me. And I trust that that will lead me to some other work, because I really want to pursue the creativity aspect related to all of this work. There's also, I'll be meeting with her for lunch. She's a professor from the University of Southern Maine. She wrote a wonderful book about women's trauma and art. And so I'm eager to meet with her and just, tell her a little bit about my work. And she's agreed to have lunch. And so these are things that I know, when you just have to follow it and go and see where it'll take you. Those are the things that I want to pursue after this. And I've had days, of course, where I thought, I don't want to see this thing for the rest of my life. But then I get excited and I say, oh no, I want to pick up the thread now, while I just, because there are parts of it that feel so energizing to me. I can't wait to dig into some other avenues. So thank you. I love that question. I hope I answered it.
It's a great feeling to have when you're still excited for your work, when you just finished it. Because there is that feeling, I don't want to see this again for the rest of my life. This has been a lot. So thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Muncy and Dr. Corwin. So now it's time for the audience to ask questions or comments of Lorinda. So please just take yourself off mute, and we'll stay with you for about 5 minutes, and then, maybe even less, a few minutes. And then the committee will recess to another Zoom room for deliberation, and then we'll come back. So I see Dr. Kimberly has her hand up, but Lorinda, you can call on people.
Oh gosh. Okay, so I'm sorry. I have to admit, I'm not as familiar with this process.
There's a little hand raised, like Dr. Kimberly's hand. You can see it in the upper left-hand corner. There's a little hand raised. Do you see that?
I do see it now. Thank you. Dr. Davis.
Okay, I'm going to try to talk without crying.
Yeah.
Lorinda, my dearest. And so we started in the PhD program together 6.5 years ago or something like that. And I could not be more proud of you and your work. We have bounced ideas off of each other and have been such an incredible support for each other during this journey together. And so as you were presenting, the words that kept coming to me over and over were you, Lorinda, you are so incredibly beautiful. Your work is beautiful. You have taken on this project with so much courage and compassion for yourself and for your journey. And that needs to be acknowledged. That needs to be acknowledged, because the work that you are doing is ancestral, it is ancient, and it is much needed to break the cycles. And so I thank Dr. Williams for bringing up the epigenetics part of it and the intergenerational trauma aspects of the work. And so I love you and I thank you so very much for this work. And so I did have just a couple questions.
Excuse me, Dr. Kimberly, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. I'm looking at the time. V, can you put us in, put the committee into the separate room now, so we can have time to deliberate?
Off you go.
Thank you.
Everybody else stays put.
So a couple of questions, really quick questions, Lorinda. One, a book, your work reminds me so much, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ruby Gibson's work. She did a book, My Body, My Earth, Somatic Archaeology. and she relates our physical, our bodies to the body of the earth, and being able to map as a tool of healing, which is exactly what you did, was being able to map our stories and to map what's happening in our bodies and being able to excavate our bodies for healing. And so your whole like this, I felt like so much synergy between your work and her work. And she takes a very spiritual lens. She's an indigenous archaeologist and healer. And so much synergy between your work. But what I also found fascinating in your work, and thanks for naming the 9-month writing process as a birthing process. And what I consider it to be, as I went through the process, was a rebirth. Like my writing became a rebirth, a birthing of myself, a conscious birthing of myself during the work. So I can definitely relate to that. So my question is, in terms of you being able to gather this data, I'm curious to know what tools or resources that you use. Was it through, because you were able to do some recall, some memory, like did you use meditation or old journals, or like how? Because what I have found with a lot of my clients as I do energy healing work with women is that there is so much so much energetic block in the sacral, that as an energy healer I know that it's related directly to sexual trauma or abuse, because I can see it. As an intuitive, I can see it. I don't bring it up all the time because a lot of times, as you mentioned, these stories become buried in that area, and so it's hidden, it's suppressed. And so for you going through this excavation, how did you get your data? Like what were some of the tools and techniques, and how did you tap into the memories to be able to pull your data?
Thank you so much for your beautiful words. And thank you for this question. Because this goes back to happening to live by an ocean. That ocean has done for me. I mean, I didn't know what I didn't know until, I happen to live right next to a cove. So it's not the open ocean, but at nighttime, at any time of day, you can hear that tide moving in and out. I wouldn't have understood what that really meant or felt like until I lived here. That metronome of the ocean was a powerful teacher. I mean, I started just saying, thank you, Sister C, getting into her. I'm not kidding you. Here in Maine, it is not warm in the water in the summertime. I spent 2 years going in that water all winter long. Because I literally, this is such a great question. I'm so glad you asked it, because it also attests to the commitment. And to me, it doesn't matter if you're writing a non-autoethnographic dissertation or not, right? It's a huge commitment to taking care of you to make the writing happen. So that was one of the things, is really immersing myself literally and figuratively in that ocean. I also committed myself to regular massage and acupuncture. And they were also extremely powerful. Not to mention, it was a nice way of, because, drawing up those memories, of course, was hard and painful and uncomfortable. There were a lot of tears. And the massage and the acupuncture and the taking the time to pay attention to the tides, to get in that ocean, they were ways of taking care of myself. And it felt like a way of balancing the whole thing. Okay, yeah, I'm going through all this pain, but look at the things I'm doing to take care of myself, So it was And I also had, I did regular sauna visits. That was very helpful for me. I needed the physical. For me, I needed the physical because I was sitting at the desk a lot. Drove me, after a while, we all know, right? You get so sick of sitting at the computer. I would go for long walks, any time of year, even if it was out cold out there, just get out and just allow thoughts and feelings to just flow. That's such an excellent question. Thank you so much for asking it.
You're welcome. And the second last question, and you've talked about a little bit the integration of your work, but what I see that is so powerful is that you have this incredible platform, you have this incredible work that you can begin to do work kind of outside of the healthcare system, because the healthcare system is invested in keeping us unhealthy. And so being able to work outside of the healthcare system, like I'm envisioning, for you, it's just me, right? Envisioning for you, like these workshops where you can really maybe do a 10-week workshop or a 12-week workshop on the again, somatic archaeology, because that's what you even take in that alternative, I mean, not alternative, that the medicine chart. I mean, not medicine, what was it called? The
Functional medicine.
functional medicine. It was medicine, functional medicine chart. But where you can work with clinicians and women who want to do the work that you've done in order to unpack or to access, because what you did was access your own healing. You access your own medicine through your body.
Good.
And so being able to teach women your process of finding your medicine that is within your body. So yes, we have the trauma within our bodies and the pain, but the medicine is also there. And so being able to walk women through your process, maybe 10, 12 weeks of, hey, this is how you do it. This is how you unpack. This is how you discover, the pain and the trauma, so you can excavate it to get to the medicine. But that's just my thoughts, just a program. So I guess it wasn't a question, but more so because you already answered a couple of ways that you plan to integrate it. And even based upon, I guess my question is, even based upon what you know now, how do you plan to take it back to your space as a practitioner? Are you still doing healthcare? Are you still a healthcare practitioner? And how do you plan now to take back all of that into your work as well? And I think you've named some of it, but those were just my thoughts. That's it.
Thank you so much. You've actually given me some ideas. I left my work in 2018. So I had only hung on work like the first year in the program. And then I said, I am not doing this. I'm going to go just make this program my full-time life. And so I haven't been in clinical medicine since. And I will be very frank with everyone. COVID helped me say, I'm not going back to that world. I have no desire to go back to that world. And it's definitely not where my heart is leading me. But I have a sincere interest in kind of hanging my own shingle. One of the things that I would love to do in my experience is that women know, this is the thing, like our pelvis knows, we know, we just have so much noise, more so every day, right? Telling us what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to look, blah, blah, blah. I could go on forever about this. But I think my experience is women just want someone who has hopefully some knowledge and some experience to figure out what's my path to getting to being healthier. And that somehow I want to be able to do that. I don't know what that looks like yet. You're right. I love the things that you mentioned because I hadn't really thought of those things. And so that's a possibility of using some of those ideas to sort of hang my own shingle and just be I've thought, gee, it would be just nice to be a consultant almost, a consultant to helping you decide, how are you going to get healthier? So thank you for that question. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And on that note, I'm speaking of hanging one's shingle, is the committee has met and deliberated, and it is my pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Lorinda Fontaine Farris.
Congratulations, Dr.
Congratulations.
Ferris. Congratulations.
So on that shingle, you can have the PhD or the doctor for.
Thank you all so much. I just really, really, really honored. And I sit here, this is the first thing when I first saw all, selfishly, I just have spent my career with women, and I look and I see, look at all this brilliant, beautiful, it's such an energy thing, I just thank you all so much. It's just.
Dr. Corin and Dr. Muncy, please. You're muted, Dr. Muncy.
Dr. Muncy, you're muted. Go ahead, though, if you want to unmute.
V, can you unmute her? Okay.
Yeah, there we go. I'm fairly Zoom friendly, but this has been magic today. I didn't know we could go in other rooms. That was I mean, what can I say, Lorinda? Well done, well deserved. I'm just in awe of what you've done. Introducing me to these lovely people today. It was a fitting end to what has been, is it 4 years I've been in your life? Is it that long? I mean, it seems quite a long time, and we've shared a lot of life between us, and it's been a pleasure. Congratulations. What can I say? But I'm sad because it's come to an end. We talked about this, so yeah. I think I'm not revealing any secrets to say our decision was unanimous. I think I don't think that's a secret. So it would have been a travesty if we were sitting here talking about we missed some dots out on page 95. I think that would have been very sad. So well done. Congratulations, well deserved.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations. Absolutely. It's been such a pleasure to watch you on this journey. And this is really a testament to the power of the field of women's spirituality and the impact. And I wish you just the absolute best as you first hopefully rest and celebrate and honor yourself and nourish yourself and take some time to feel just this incredible thing that you have done, and make everyone call you Dr. Fontaine for a long time, or Fontaine Farris. I see you have just Fontaine here, so I don't know which one is. Can you tell us what would you prefer?
I am very much looking forward to being Lorinda Fontaine.
Okay, so Dr. Fontaine, yes. So Dr. Fontaine, I hope that you have everyone that you know call you Dr. Fontaine, and you enjoy it and you eat it up and you just feel proud of what you have accomplished here. It's tremendous. And what a beautiful thing that you're sharing with the world. And I do hope that you hang your shingle as a consultant and bring what you've learned as a clinician and as an individual into the world for the better. You're going to change people's lives. You're going to continue to change people's lives. You clearly already have. So congratulations. Well done. And please stay in touch with us. Let us know what you do. Please come back as an alum. We will celebrate you in May. Hopefully you'll be here to walk, to graduate, and please stay in touch with us. We can help you spread the word about your consultant page if you end up going in that direction.
Thank you.
I didn't think to say stay in touch, Lorinda. You have no choice. You will be in touch.
No, I have to say though, I'm thinking, oh, I was sort of hoping I get to graduate in December, but
Sorry, I spoke out of turn. Yeah, of course, yes, yes. But our walking ceremony, I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. You get to graduate in December. I apologize. You will be no longer a student in the spring, but you're welcome to come. Like our graduation ceremony is in May at CIIS, and if you get to choose, but if you want to come and walk across the stage and be hooded, that is when we will, as a community in person, celebrate you. That's it, yeah. But
Thank
thank
you
you
for-
for asking. Yeah.
I didn't know that the detailed information, so thank you for telling me.
Hey, Lorinda, this is your friendly program coordinator speaking. Just because there is always a woman behind the curtain, you know. So I just want to say it was a pleasure working with you on the admin staff. It was just absolute delight, you know, to receive emails from you, to receive little presents, cards from you. Just the dissertation today. Congratulations, by the way, excellent work. It's not, by the way, congratulations, excellent work. Also had this special energy. I mean, you know, I attend this as I attend these as a student and as an administrator, and this one really has a special place in my heart. So thank you for this opportunity. Nothing else really. I mean, there are going to be forms and you're graduating in December, and, you know, we'll inform you about all other details. But just a huge thank you, and you know, cherish and deeply enjoy it. You so